Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for today's opening talk of product elevation. Welcome to Product Elevation. I'm thrilled to be here. Today, we're going to start by talking about how we can transform our organizations to really build world changing products. We've heard so much about product led transformation recently, but really, what does it mean? Where does it come from? Why product led? Let's talk about the origin of product led transformation. Originally, most companies were either engineering led or they were sales led. If you're engineering led, that typically meant you're building solutions in search of a problem. And if you're sales led, that meant, just anything goes as long as it brings in revenues. Just build whatever brings in revenues. And companies realized that what they needed was a balance between these two. You couldn't be engineering led or sales led. And that's why product led transformation came along. Because we need to find this balance between engineering and sales led. When we talk about product led transformation, we keep hearing these words like we need to be customer driven, we have to be user centric, we have to build user centric products. And all of this is the goal of transformation. But the path to getting there so far has really been foggy. For us to have a clear sense of how do you actually transform, we have to have clarity on what is this transformation about. And sometimes the label itself really helps. What we're trying to achieve, instead of product led, which sometimes sounds like a power grab within the organization, that we're trying to shift power in the organization from engineering or sales to product, which is not really the idea. The idea is that we need vision driven transformation, meaning that, instead of being engineering led or sales led, we need to be vision driven. And that's what transformation really means. But until now, transformation has really been interpreted as we just have to be lean and agile and give customers what they're asking for. The quote I just hear so often when I'm working with companies is we have to be agile and delight customers by giving them what they want. This North Star of delighting customers and being agile turns out to be flawed. Why? Because lean and agile give us the equivalent of a fast car. They really help us innovate faster, meaning that it's like being in a Ferrari or a McLaren. It's great when you can drive fast. And also, when you get customer feedback, that's also important, right? That's like stopping to ask for directions when you're in your fast car, just to check if you're heading in the right way. So customer feedback is important. But the reality is, before we get into our fast car, or before we start driving, or stopping to ask for directions, we really, as the driver, need to know where we want to go and roughly how we're going to get there. So I want to give you a concrete example. Now that I've given you this analogy, I want to give you a concrete example of why agile transformation, just with this North Star of delighting customers, why it doesn't guarantee successful products. What goes wrong? And the example I want to share with you is of a company called Knack. So I met Paul, who's the founder. He started Knack because he was inspired by the suspended coffee movement. Now, if you're familiar with the suspended coffee movement, it started in Italy about 100 years ago, where the idea is that you pay for two coffees, one of which you consume, and the second is paid forward for someone who could use a random act of kindness. Now, Paul, inspired by the suspended coffee movement, started an app so that you could spread kindness in the world through random acts of coffee, as he called it. So when I met Paul, his numbers were looking fantastic. He was telling me about the organic growth which he was seeing, which, to us product managers, organic growth sounds like nirvana in itself. He had a group of daily ardent users who, came and spent long times on the app every single day. So even his NPS scores were high, and yet Paul was not happy. Why? Because despite all of these fantastic numbers, there was one number that was not looking good, which was everyone was coming to his app to get free coffee. No one was actually buying anyone a coffee or spreading a random act of kindness on this app. So the product that Paul had built was not successful. It wasn't creating the change he intended. What had happened was he had caught product diseases. And these product diseases are so easy to catch. I've caught so many of these in my own product experiences. So let's do a checkup and see if you recognize some of these diseases. This first one is obsessive sales disorder. With the goal of pleasing his customers, Paul was trying everything. He was even spending his own money to fund free coffees inside this app. And his customers just wanted more free coffee. So no matter what he did, there was always just more to do. And in the end, it wasn't really creating a better experience anyway. They were always complaining that there wasn't enough free coffee on this app. You might be seeing obsessive sales disorder in your company. If you're working on a lot of custom features for each of your customers, where you're trying to perhaps give them individual pricing for each customer, these are all examples of obsessive sales disorder, where we keep trading off the long term, like giving up on the long term in exchange for the short term. This next disease is hypermetrocemia. In our world where we are constantly hearing the words about being data-driven and analytical, there is an obsession with moving metrics up and to the right. We keep hearing we have to measure and test everything. Paul, in this case, was measuring everything, testing everything. He got all sorts of numbers on his product, from NPS scores to daily average users, but the one metric that really mattered was not what he was optimizing for, which was how many people are actually spending their own money to buy someone a coffee. This next disease is narcissist complex. This happens when we're so focused on our own goals, what we think customers need, that we sometimes get disconnected from what the customer actually needs. So in this case, Paul felt like, if only I had this feature to pay for someone else's coffee. If I had that feature to pay for someone else's coffee, I would use it. So clearly my customers would use it too. Well, it turned out that that's not the feature that made customers actually want to buy someone a coffee. So that's narcissist complex, when we're just focused inwards on our own goals. Now, if you've recognized these diseases from your past experiences, it's because these diseases really indicate to us that we're not being completely vision-driven. It means that our vision, somewhere there is a break in the chain between translating our vision into action. When our iterations, when our actions are not driven by a clear vision and strategy, these diseases creep in. But the good news is that we can solve these diseases too, because what happens is lean and agile, they're fantastic execution methodologies, and they give us speed. But speed by itself can look like this. It can look like chaos when we're all moving fast, but in different directions. As we know, what we really need is velocity, not speed. So that means we need speed, which comes from our execution, but we need to add direction to it. And that's when all of us, when we're pointing in the same direction, when all of the arrows in the organization are pointing in the same direction, that's when we have forward velocity. This is where radical product thinking comes in. It's a methodology for building world-changing products, and it gives us a step-by-step process for translating vision into action. Radical product thinking means you can engineer change very systematically. It means starting with this clarity of vision of what's the change you're trying to bring about, then translating it into a set of actionable steps, which is strategy. Then you translate a vision and strategy into a set of priorities. You bring your vision into your everyday decision making. Then you can translate it into agile or waterfall, however you choose to do it, execution and measurement. And then finally, culture. This is where you can apply all of these ideas and engineer the culture that you need in your organization. But most importantly, all of these elements of radical product thinking are structured so that you can communicate your rationale and bring your whole team with you on the journey. Now, I want to give you a sense of, why this is so radical, because the words I've used, vision, strategy, you've heard those words before. The difference is, in radical product thinking, I need you to unlearn so much of what you've ever learned about a good vision. And here's why. Let's start with the example of NAC. NAC's vision could have been written like this: contributing to human progress by empowering people to spread kindness. This is typically the kind of vision we're told we must have. It's this broad vision that's aspirational, unchanging. It sounds inspiring. It's short and sweet, right? But here's the problem. This vision is practically meaningless. Why? Because I can pretty much describe a bunch of different things that can be under this vision statement. For example, this could be the vision statement for my parenting style. I'm trying to get my kids to spread kindness. I'm empowering them to spread kindness. So this could be my parenting vision. This could also be the vision for an app that is nudging you to make donations to nonprofits. This could be an app or this could be a product vision for a company that makes stickers that tells you to pay it forward. I mean, pretty much anything goes under this vision. This vision is not acting as a North Star, and that's the problem with it. What you need is a detailed vision, not just an inspiring slogan or a tagline. What you need a vision what you need is a vision that sounds more like this. One, whose world are you changing? It can't be everyone's. The second is, what is the problem? What are they trying to do and how are they doing that today? The third is probably the most important to me, which is, why is the status quo unacceptable? And if we cannot answer that, we have no business building this product. The fourth then is, when will you know that you've arrived? Meaning, when can you say mission accomplished? And then finally, how? This is finally where you can talk about your product or your solution or your technology or the experience to describe, how are you going to bring about this world? Now, what I've learned is, even when you know you have to answer the who, what, why, when, and how, if you're starting with a blank sheet of paper, this task is nothing short of playing vision bingo. So in the radical product thinking way, you have this vision statement that's a fill in the blank statement. So you can focus on answering these profound questions instead of playing this game of vision bingo. Now that I've given you a taste for why radical product thinking is different, let's talk about how we applied these concepts at NAC. As you know by now, the first thing we had to do was start with a vision. We had to think about, what's the change we envision? And so Paul's change that he wanted to bring about was spreading kindness and getting people to pay it forward. So the product that he built was then an app where users can participate in this random act of coffee. The product is only a mechanism for bringing about a change. So first you have to think about what's the change and your product to then bring it about. Then you can write your vision. So this is NAC's vision as we wrote it out in the radical vision statement. So today, when people who often go to coffee shops want to spread kindness around them or say thank you to someone, they have to remember to pay it forward and overcome awkwardness if they're paying for a stranger. This is unacceptable because it results in these acts being rare and not a habit. We envision a world where spreading kindness is easy and it becomes a habit for people. We're bringing about this world through an app that makes it easy to spread random acts of kindness by buying someone a coffee to brighten their day. So this was the radical vision statement behind NAC. But that's only the first step. So then we needed a strategy to translate this into a set of actionable steps. The easy to remember mnemonic is RDCL, or radical, which is starting your strategy with defining the real pain points. What's the pain that makes someone come to your product? This is where you need to do some user research, perhaps customer journey mapping. Next, you can think about, what's the solution to solve that pain? This is where you can apply design thinking. The C is for capabilities. This is where you think about both the tangible and intangible elements. tangible things such as technical infrastructure or IP that powers your design. Or partnerships, perhaps relationships or trust, the fluffy stuff that we don't always think about, but these are engines that might power your design. And finally, logistics. This is the part that we so often forget when building our product. These are ideas that are bolted on as afterthoughts. We need to think about the business model, thinking about sales channels. How will we support this product? How will we train people to use it? How does the product get delivered to the customer? We need to think about these elements in a way that it's aligned with the R, the D, and the C. So in the case of NAC, we started by defining what were the pain points. What made someone come to NAC's app? Well, as a user, I came to the app because I typically got an invitation from someone because I got a free coffee from someone. They sent me a free coffee and I was really happy to claim it, but I was just hesitant to use my money to buy someone a coffee because I've never done that before. And so our design, our solution was that we needed to get people to experience the joy of giving someone a coffee without having to pay for it first. We needed to get them to just experience this joy of giving, and then we could teach them to pay for someone's coffee. So that was the solution. But to actually deliver the solution, the engine that we needed was we needed some, we didn't have infinite funding, so we couldn't fund all of these free coffees. So what did Paul do? He went and established some partnerships. This was the capabilities that we needed. He established partnerships with brands who then wanted to sponsor this message of random acts of coffee. And that allowed us in the design to enable the feature where each user was getting 2 coffees from a brand. 1 coffee they could consume, and the second they had to gift to someone. This way they could learn how to gift coffees and experience the joy of giving. And then in terms of logistics, we completely changed our business model. The pricing model then became that we were going to get a percentage of the brand's sponsorship fee. So this was the radical strategy. Next, we had to build this app and think about how our vision and strategy were going to translate into everyday action. This is finally where you need to think about the pesky problem of survival, because even when your vision and strategy are grand, you actually need to survive long enough to achieve this vision and strategy. And so what that means is you have to balance the long term against the short term. You have to think of this yin and yang model of your long term, which is the vision, versus the short term, which is survival. And so when you do this intuitively, you just do this in your head. For your team, it's so useful if you want to communicate your rationale for how you make these trade-offs. If you show this, visualize this on an X and Y axis instead of this yin and yang. Think about your vision as your Y axis. Is it a good vision fit or not? And your survival is the X axis. Is this helping you survive another day or not? If you're a startup, this survival is about financial survival. If you don't make money, you don't have fundraising done, or if you don't bring in revenues, you're dead. And that's your survival. If you're a big company, survival may not be about finance. Let's say you're a big bank, you have the money. And so survival for a product manager in a big bank, for example, might mean that it's stakeholder support, internal stakeholder support. If your stakeholder thinks that your product is worthless, that we really don't need it, they'll stop funding your product and your product dies. And so now that you've defined your vision and now that you've defined your survival, you can think about what's good for your vision and what's good for your survival, right? So what's good for both is, of course, ideal. Those are easy decisions. If it's bad for both, those are also easy decisions. That's the danger quadrant. Don't do it. Nobody's asking for those features anyway. The harder quadrants are the one where you're investing in the vision. So that's a good vision fit, but it's not helpful in the short term. Maybe stakeholders aren't begging for it. Maybe it's not bringing revenues, like if you're refactoring code for 3 months. And the opposite of that is building vision debt. Remember I mentioned obsessive sales disorder? That's where you were doing things for survival, maybe it's bringing in a big deal because of a custom feature. Maybe you're making stakeholders happy in the short term, but maybe it's not a good vision fit. Then you're building vision debt. Well, so at NAC, here's how we started prioritizing. We started by having to invest in the code base. We had to invest in the vision and change out the complete code base and restart development. We then built features in the ideal quadrant. We built the ability to give two coffees, one to drink and the other to gift. And then we had to build some vision debt because we needed brands to sponsor these coffees, and they needed some features like knowing how many people were getting views of my campaign, how many people saw my message of spreading this random act of kindness. And then to counteract that, we built some more in investing in the vision. We built this ability to take payment from the user. We knew that people weren't going to use that in the short term. So it wasn't really a revenue source for us in the short term, but it was important for the vision. And so once we had prioritized things, we then thought about, how will we measure whether it's working or not? To measure, we first had to start with a hypothesis. So we looked at our strategy and we built our hypothesis. We said, and you can write it in this if, then, because format. If the activity we believed was we train users to give coffee that's sponsored by brands, then the outcome we expect is that by gifting this free coffee, they'll be more likely to spend their own money on spreading kindness, because we believe that the connection is that they'll start to enjoy spreading kindness through coffee. So this was the hypothesis. And the way we were going to measure that is through two metrics. One was the number of people who were gifting free coffees that were coming in from brands. And the second was the number of people who were willing to spend their own money then to gift someone a coffee. And everything in our sprint was the stuff that we were going to do to be able to set up this experiment and then measure it. The way we measured success then was by the percentage of users who were using their own money to spread kindness. And what we found was, at the beginning, I told you it was zero. Nobody was spending their own money. But by the time we had tried this first experiment without any further optimization, even 27% of users who had gotten this free coffee that they learned to gift with, they were now using their own money to spread random acts of coffee. Our experiment was working. So my point is, all these popular metrics, such as daily users, time spent on site, NPS scores, this is not to say that they're completely irrelevant. Those are important, but they aren't necessarily indicators of whether you're making progress towards your vision. Now, I shared with you how we changed the approach to product at NAC. But NAC was a startup. Perhaps you're working in a larger organization. For you to be able to make changes, sometimes there's one more step that's required, and that's the step where you need to cure this disease of locked-in syndrome. Locked-in syndrome is the disease that happens when we're committed to what's working in the past, what has worked in the past. So perhaps, the approach that you were using in the past was leading to decent enough revenues. So why change? And that's what I hear so often when we have locked-in syndrome. I see that this product-led transformation, it requires new ways of working. But what are these new ways of working? And why do I need to do this? I just don't get why. What we were doing was so wrong. We need to address this locked-in syndrome so that product managers can be more effective at applying these ideas of radical product thinking. So what do? You can actually use these ideas of radical product thinking to create organizational change, to change the culture around how you apply product thinking. So I want to give you the example of a large organization where I was brought in because there were many of these diseases at the company. And when I was brought in to train product managers on this new approach, I was going to train the product managers, but I also needed to make some changes in the organization so that those product managers could be more effective in applying these ideas. So what we did, let me tell you about the organization. And this organization built products for large venues for ticketing purposes. And so they wanted to please their customers, delight customers by giving them exactly what they wanted. So a lot of these clients, they were expecting custom features. They were, after all, very large organizations, and so they often demanded custom features. And these product diseases were starting to really set in because even if the product manager said, "No, we really can't build this feature," the customers would often go to the CEO, and it was really hard to then say no. And so how did we engineer a culture change? We had to start with a really clear vision. Why are we transforming? Why is the status quo really not working? We then had to build a strategy for how are we going to bring about this change systematically. There were so many stakeholders within the organization, all the way from sales and marketing to engineering. We had to create change all the way from the top by getting everyone to see the role of product management and why we needed this product led transformation. We then had to create a roadmap for transformation. So, for example, one of the first things that we had to change was product management needed a seat at the table when talking to customers to be able to understand their needs, but also counter propose when they needed these custom features. We had to create a roadmap of all the changes systematically that we needed to bring about for product management to be more effective. And then finally, we also applied these ideas to execution and measurement. So instead of OKRs just being driven top down, product managers really needed to think about their vision and their strategy for their product. And that was driving what we would measure in terms of being able to determine if this product was successful. But most importantly, we used all of these ideas to communicate the rationale for transformation and how we were going to get there. We had to bring everyone with us on the journey. For transformation, what we need is clarity and alignment. That clarity and alignment is what allows us to be vision driven and systematically translate vision into everyday action. And so we need not just agile or lean so that we're moving fast, but we need to communicate this direction so that all the arrows are pointing in the same direction and we have velocity. Finally, I want to end by giving you a really inspiring example of how you can create vision driven change and just how you can really create these world changing products by being vision driven. Why product led transformation is so important to be able to create change. And the example that I want to give you is that of an organization that makes papadums. Now, if you're familiar with papadums, those are the lentil crackers that you've tasted in Indian restaurants, and often it's served with chutney. But the thing that most of us don't know about papadums is that there's one organization that has a huge market share. They are the dominant player in papadums. And that organization is called Dutt. So Dutt has 60% market share in papadums. The rest of the market is just truly fragmented. They have over $220 million in annual revenues. And most fascinatingly, Dutt is owned by 45,000 women who are all equal partners in the organization. So how did Dutt come about, and why is it so vision driven? I have to tell you about how this organization started. It was started by 7 women in 1959, and they started with this idea that they really just wanted to earn a dignified living. They were living in a patriarchal society, and they came from these poor households where the husbands controlled the income. They wanted to contribute to household income, and they wanted to be able to influence spending so that they could educate their kids and raise their next generation out of poverty. And so these women wanted to start something, but they felt like the only skill that they had was cooking. They couldn't go out and get jobs as a result. They didn't have much of an education. And so they started by rolling papadums. And they were going to sell these papadums to stores, and whatever they got out of it, profits or losses, they decided they would split it equally amongst themselves. They wanted a dignified living, so they decided they would never, ever take charity. Even if it was a loss, they would split it amongst themselves. And so they started with this vision. and they started rolling these papadums on their building's terrace. It started with these 7 women, soon they grew to 25. At some point, they became 300 over the course of a year, and they no longer fit in the building's terrace. Today, Legit is a much larger organization, and they have a pretty complex setup where there are these buses that drive member sisters from different locations to these centers where they pick up the dough, they go back home, they roll papadums at home. The next day, they come back, they drop off the papadums that they rolled, they get paid for what they rolled, and then they pick up the dough that they take back home, and the cycle starts over. And then every 6 months, they share profits equally. Legit was vision driven because they had such clarity in terms of their vision. They knew what change they wanted to bring about, which was giving financial independence to these women and giving them the possibility of just earning a dignified living. And their product, which was these high quality papadums that they're making that taste like they're homemade, that was just this mechanism to be able to bring about this change. When I interviewed the president of Legit to ask her about the vision, she did not quote me any inspiring tagline. She spoke just genuinely from her heart, telling me about, just what she envisioned. And this is the president of Legit who kind of grew up from the ranks, rolling papadums since she was very young. There was no tagline that any of these women remember. They just feel this vision deeply in their hearts and they're able to just share it. And so I wrote it out in this radical vision statement. It reads as follows. Today, when women without education from poor households want to run their household and educate their kids, they have to depend on their husband's income and they can't influence spending. This is unacceptable because it limits their children's educational prospects and it repeats the cycle of poverty. We envision a world where women become self-reliant and it leads to their socioeconomic progress. We are bringing this world about through high-quality papadums and later other fast-moving consumer goods without ever taking charity. So this is the vision. But of course, we know now that vision is only the first step. They needed a really clear strategy. So what was their strategy? In terms of pain points, they would ask the question, well, what do these women need for a dignified living? And there were two things. One was they had a high work ethic, but just didn't have the education. The second was that these women were primary caregivers. So they had kids or elderly to take care of at home. And so in terms of design, the solution was that these women could not work in factories. They had to work from home. If this whole setup of Legit was about taking these women from home, busing them to factories, well, these women couldn't stay away from home for that long. They couldn't have engaged in this model. The other piece of the solution was that these women were given daily wages every single day. Why? Because this way they could influence household spending every day, and that gave them power within the household to influence spending. In terms of capabilities, for them to be able to share profits equally every 6 months, well, they needed open books and transparent accounting. Because, if all of these 45,000 women are splitting profits equally, they need to trust the system. So anybody should be able to look at the books. But also, there was another element of 45,000 women splitting profits equally. Can you imagine 45,000 lawyers in a firm who are splitting profits equally regardless of seniority? I mean, it's just unfathomable, right? And so in terms of capabilities, they had to build this mindset in these women that we're going to share profits equally. The mindset was that we are going to have to maximize group earnings, not think about our individual gains. This is why Legit had a pledge where these women are pledging that they're all member sisters. They call each other sisters and they're all going to share profits equally. And the last thing was logistics. In terms of the business model, to be able to pay out wages every single day, Legit, right from the start, they had a business model that they created where they're not giving or taking credit at all. And to date, they still don't give or take credit. All the accounts are settled on the spot with their suppliers or with the stores. And finally, think about the fact that these 45,000 women are all rolling papadums at home, and yet Lijat is known for their quality. Their brand name is synonymous with high quality. And it's because, they had to, in terms of logistics, think about how they were going to do decentralized quality control, train these women so that they can really detect, and pick out what's not good quality. So this was their comprehensive strategy. I want to get you to think about also, the fact that this solution that they created really creates equity in society. When we build our products, you're affecting people's lives, no matter kind of what kind of product you're building. And we need to think about baking equity into every element of our strategy. When you're thinking about pain points and you're figuring out what your users need, think about whether your user research has included people who might have been marginalized. When you think about design, think about whether your solution is inclusive or accessible. When you think about capabilities, look at your IP strategy. Is it a partnership model or are you being colonialist and extractive? And finally, you can apply these ideas also to your business model. Is your business model extractive? Are you preserving systemic oppression through your business model? We can bake equity into our strategy and be profitable at the same time. Once you've thought about vision and strategy, you now need to apply it in priorities. So how did Lijat do this? Well, they started off by taking some vision debt. They took a loan because they needed that to survive, but it wasn't good for their long-term vision. But to counteract that vision debt, they invested in the vision by deciding that they would share in profits or losses equally, that they would never take charity. Then they did some things in the ideal quadrant. Paying wages every day and not giving or taking credit was good both for survival and it was a good vision fit. And then as they grew a little bit and had a little bit more of cash flow, they then started to invest in the vision. They did that by giving women financial literacy and giving them education. And then finally, you can translate all of this into your execution and measurement. And while things like popular metrics such as revenues, market share, customer reviews, those are all important because of course, if you don't have revenues, you're not giving independence to women, financial independence to women. The one metric by which Lijat measures success is the number of women to whom they give financial independence. That is the most important metric for them, and it's derived from their vision and strategy. So really the summary of the story that I want you to take away is that Lijat does delight its customers with these high quality papadums, but that delight is a means to an end to be able to achieve this vision of giving financial independence to 45,000 women. So transformation and this idea of delighting customers, it's great to delight, but it's always just a means to an end to create the change that you want to see in the world. And so transformation is not just about delighting customers. It's about how you can actually create change, how you can transform to build world-changing products. And so how do you apply these ideas? Well, if you're using lean and agile today, that's great. If you're using waterfall, that's fine too. But whatever you're doing for execution and feedback-driven execution, it's important to add vision and strategy to it. And that's where you can bring in radical product thinking. And you can use that together with lean and agile so that you create your vision and strategy, and then you can do feedback-driven execution and test your hypotheses as you execute. And so I leave you with the idea that you can transform very systematically to be able to create change with these 5 elements, and you can use those elements to communicate and bring everyone with you on the journey. And so finally, if you'd like to learn more, you could get the Radical Product Thinking book. It's available wherever books are. You can also ask me about workshops and training on radical product thinking and to be able to transform very systematically. You can also get the free toolkit for radical product thinking. You can get it on radicalproduct.com. And lastly, if you have thoughts or questions that I don't get to today, please feel free to reach out to me and ask me questions on LinkedIn. I also always love it when people reach out and share with me kind of what they're inspired by and how they're going to create change, or just stories of how they have created change using radical product thinking. Thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to answering your questions.